Bodyark, Kansas, a town with a dream. Nestled within the rolling Flint Hills of Kansas lies a once prosperous community that was founded on hard work, determination, and respect for the common man. But all that now persists is a desolate land that remains in the shadows as society progresses. Bodyark, Kansas is located within the Bloomington Township in Butler County, about 5 miles southeast of Augusta. The town experienced major economic growth from its location on the Little Walnut River. Fertile farmlands, plentiful food sources, and a general availability of groundwater blessed the small community from the time it was unofficially founded in 1875 until it started to regress in 1951. Bodyark's inhabitants realized the value of advancement and invested in many new technologies that drew tourists in from all over the lands of Kansas and beyond. With many of these factors aiding in the town's persistence, Bodyark quickly transformed into a thriving community fueled by a successful mill, ample jobs, tremendous opportunities, and a convenient location on the river. Many years before Bodyark was officially founded, the Osage Indians realized the value and fertility of the land and established a settlement just east of the Little Walnut River. As the Indians were being forced off of their land and further south, an Osage Indian reservation was sanctioned in the southeast section of Kansas. The particular tribal community located in Bodyark was settled in 1863, and the people thrived there for 7 years before they sold their land to the United States government. Various treaties signed by the Osage Indians slowly diminished their land as the years progressed, though they always received fair compensation. On July 15, 1870, the Drum Creek Treaty was signed, relinquishing the rest of their land to be sold for $1.25 to new settlers arriving in Kansas. The tribe was anxious to sell their lands in the state, partly because white men were trying to settle on their reservation without permission before it was sold. The tribe purchased 640,000 acres of land in the Cherokee Outlet in Oklahoma shortly after the treaty was signed. The Osage Indians are one of the few Indian nations to have purchased their own reservation. Shortly after the vast tract of land was made available for settlers to purchase in 1870, towns and townships began to take from around the area. A petition was presented to establish Bloomington Township in Butler County on April 1, 1872. Just 2 short years after people were allowed to settle the land. 20 days later, the petition was granted, paving the way for a future of thriving communities. Samuel Rankin was documented in 1867 as the first white settler in Bloomington Township, even though he was living there illegally since the land still belonged to the Osage Nation. As pioneers continued to settle the land, the small town of Bodyark was unofficially established in 1875, and it was described as a well-watered township, and much livestock is raised, handled, and fed from the products of the farms. The first settlers arrived from Kentucky and Tennessee, as did most of the settlers that inhabited the town at a later date. When Bodyark was established, the new community still didn't have a name. Much debate ensued among the people of what to call the town, but the community soon came to an agreement. The original name of the town was known as Bodyark, named after the Osage Indians that settled the land just years before. The Osage orange tree is closely tied to the Osage Nation, partly because the tribe settled close to the native location of the tree. The people utilized this tree by making bows out of the wood, as well as other objects. Bodiarc is a literal translation of wood of the bow in the French language. Shortly after, the town's name was shortened to Bodiarc because it was easier to spell, although it was pronounced the same way. The original settlers knew the importance of incorporating history into the town's name, and it was named in homage and respect to the indigenous people who settled before. As the colonists were beginning to profit from their fertile farmland, they came together as a community to build the first public building, the Cumberland Church. The church was built by several religious groups in Bodiarc and the surrounding areas in 1883, drawing more people to the town, thus adding economic development. Since many diverse religious groups aided in constructing the building, it was agreed that the separate groups would conduct services by taking turns. The people soon found it difficult to cooperate with each other in sharing the building, and a permanent pastor was soon chosen to conduct the services. The church was built just across the street from the cemetery, which was established in 1876. The original land was donated by Marion Taylor, but the cemetery was soon expanded to accommodate more plots. Notice the architecture and the size of the bell tower. The church burned down in 1928 and a new church was constructed out of brick in the same location. 2 years after the Cumberland Church was built, a bridge was proposed so people could easily cross the river by horse and buggy. The main factor pushing the construction of the bridge was to accommodate people living on the east side of the river who wanted to bury their family members in the new cemetery on the west side of the river. It was commissioned in 1885 by the Kansas City Bridge and Iron Company, and it has been in use ever since. As more people were beginning to move to the town, the settlers soon realized the need for a general store and meeting place. Up until this point, settlers were forced to travel to Douglas or Augusta to buy supplies and send mail. The two-story store was constructed completely by volunteers and officially opened in 1890. The general store served as a post office, meeting area, and eventually a gas station when the automobile gained popularity in the state. This store quickly became a spot where people would gather. It was a common tradition to carve your name in the stone if you visited the store, even if you were considered a foreigner to the area. Leonard Carr, a local man who used to live next door to the general store, recalls stories from people he talked to who lived in the town in the era of its glory days. An underground cellar is located underneath of the store, where huge ice blocks were stored, and people were constantly amazed at how they would not thaw throughout the entire summer months. As stated earlier, people of Bodiarc were advocates in advancement of technology, as evidenced by the installation of a telephone in the general store. Bodiarc was the first town to have a telephone in the entire county. This was possible because most members of the community each contributed $5 to have the phone line installed. The post office was officially established in the store on December 21st, 1892, but was discontinued in 1904 because it was more economical to deliver mail from Douglas. Bodiarc's first postman was William Vilos. During the turn of the 20th century, a water-powered mill was constructed along the river to grind up flour and corn. It was known as the Bradford Mill and brought many jobs to the area. Virgil E. Bottom, a former resident of Bodiark, recalls seeing the mill as a small child. The building which housed the mill shook as the big water wheel turned the wheels that drove the equipment of the mill. A bridge across the river, just a few yards below the dam, afforded an excellent view of the dam and the water wheel, and I never tired of standing on the bridge, watching the wheels rotate. Bodiark was finally chartered and became an official town on November 25, 1899, just as the mill was being built. Although the mill brought jobs and economic growth to the community, it was torn down in 1918, after Frank Martin purchased the land so he could build a house close to the spot. The town also constructed a one-room schoolhouse 1/2 mile southwest from the church. Not much is known about the school, partly because of its short lifespan and low attendance. The only documented picture of the school was taken in 1919 with the graduating 8th grade class standing in front. As the mill was torn down, the school closed, and the post office discontinued, it seemed as though Bodiark's future was uncertain. However, the town's luck was going to continue. In 1910, a dam was constructed by the Empire Gas and Oil Company, about a 1/4 mile upstream from the bridge. This became a great fishing spot for the locals, and tourists started to realize this as well. An article published by the Wichita Eagle in 1927 praised the town of Bodiark and recommended it to anyone looking to get away from it all. It was titled, "Short Trip Down Walnut to Bodiark. Camp out all day and come home with an unusually big fish story. Fine roads to travel." After this article was published, families came by the carload to camp out in the town along the river and fish. People began to come from all over the state to camp for even a week. $1 per day was charged to campers who chose to stay overnight. Other amenities that brought people to the area included a scout camp located 1 mile south of town and a car wash. It was the first of its kind in Butler County, and the car wash was what typically brought people from Augusta into town. For unknown reasons, the dam was destroyed in 1944, resulting in worse fishing conditions. Family visits to the town became more sporadic because parks and fishing areas were beginning to gain popularity in Wichita at this time. After tourists began to leave, the town's effort to remain became futile. Ralph Kennedy was the 6th and final owner of the general store. He leased it in 1946, but was forced to shut it down in 1951 because of low revenues. After the store closed, many residents left the town to move to larger cities for convenience, though most of the families who previously owned farmland close to the town continued to work it, even though they were not living there. Although Bodiark never had an urban community of houses in close quarters with each other, rural farm families aided the economic development when the store was open. Today, the remains of the town's glory days are easily present to the curious onlooker passing through. The bridge, constructed in 1885, was still in use in 2013, though a new one is here today. The Cumberland Community Church and Cumberland Cemetery still remain as well. Although a few people have lived in the top story of the previous general store since it closed, it has remained abandoned for the last 20 years. According to Leonard Carr, a man named Jim Zodke purchased the property at an auction. He had dreams of renovating it and turning it back into a bed and breakfast, but no work has been done since he purchased the property in 2003. Currently, 7 to 10 homesteads are located close to the town, some of which have relatively modern houses. The people of Bodiark succeeded in building a thriving community based on hard work and some luck as well. But all that remains are empty buildings and quiet waters, telling the silent story of a time that will forever live in history. A special thanks to Evan Voth, the writer of this article. After weeks of searching and asking around, this single document is the only reference to Bodiark's history I could find. If you have ever been to this place or have any stories, questions, comments, issues, or concerns, please feel free to leave a comment. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and maybe even tell a friend. Thank you all for hanging out, and I'll see you next time.